Byzantine Cataphracts, armored to the extreme, steel from head to toe. The year is 1097. The place is the high plains of Anatolia, near the ancient city of Dorylaeum. A Crusader army from Western Europe is marching toward the Holy Land. They are knights in shining mail, confident in their superiority. They have already defeated the Turks in several skirmishes. They believe that no Muslim cavalry can stand against a Frankish charge. But today, they are about to meet a ghost. Not a Turkish ghost. Something older. Something more terrifying. Cresting the ridge ahead of them come riders clad entirely in metal. Not just the riders. Their horses are armored too. Iron plates cover every surface. The horses wear faceplates, neck guards, chest protectors, and flank armor. The men wear conical helmets with mail veils, lamellar cuirasses that reach their thighs, vambraces on their arms, greaves on their legs, and gauntlets on their hands. Their faces are hidden behind iron masks shaped like human faces, cold, expressionless, inhuman. They carry lances 12 feet long, maces, swords, and bows. They do not shout, they do not cheer. They advance in perfect silence, rank after rank, a moving wall of polished steel reflecting the sun so brightly that the Crusaders have to shield their eyes. A French knight, writing home after the battle, will describe them as iron men on iron horses, moving not like soldiers, but like a single creature, a dragon with 1,000 scales. These are the Byzantine Cataphracts, the heaviest cavalry the world had seen since the fall of Rome, armored to the extreme, steel from head to toe. And for nearly 1,000 years, they were the unstoppable fist of the Eastern Roman Empire. Today, we are going to climb inside that armor. We will learn what it took to become a cataphract. We will understand how they fought, how they trained, and why they terrified everyone who faced them. By the time we finish, you will see why the Byzantine Empire, the last echo of ancient Rome, survived for 1,000 years after the fall of the Western Empire. The answer, in large part, is the cataphract. To understand the cataphract, you must first understand the empire that created them. The Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, as they called themselves, was not medieval Europe. It was Rome, but Rome transformed. The Byzantines inherited the military manuals, the siege engines, the logistics, and the strategic thinking of the ancient legions. But they faced enemies the legions never imagined. Mounted archers from the steppes, heavily armored Persian knights, and later the relentless cavalry of the Arab caliphates. The Byzantines needed a weapon that could do everything. It had to charge like a medieval knight. It had to shoot like a mounted archer. It had to withstand arrows, lances, swords, and maces. And it had to do this in the brutal terrain of Anatolia, the Balkans, and Syria. The answer was the cataphract. The word comes from the Greek cataphractos, meaning covered over or completely enclosed. And that is exactly what the cataphract was. A man and his horse wrapped in so much metal that they became a single mobile fortress. The earliest cataphracts appeared in the 1st century AD among the nomadic Sarmatians and the Parthian Empire. The Romans borrowed the idea, but the Byzantines perfected it. By the 6th century, under Emperor Justinian and his great general Belisarius, the Byzantine cataphract had become the most sophisticated heavy cavalry in history. And they would remain so until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Let us begin with the armor. This is where the cataphract earned his name. The rider wore a helmet of two types. The earlier type was a conical steel cap with a mail curtain called a camelorchion that covered the neck, throat, and shoulders. The later type was a full-face helmet with a hinged faceplate, often sculpted to resemble a human face or a fearsome mask. These masks had two tiny eye slits and breathing holes. They made the cataphract look like an iron statue come to life beneath the helmet. The cataphract wore a padded cloth cap and a mail coif. His body was protected by a lamellar cuirass, hundreds of small iron or steel plates laced together with leather cords. Lamellar was superior to mail because it distributed the force of a blow across a wider area. An arrow that might slip through a mail link would shatter against a lamellar plate. A sword cut that might break a rib through mail would leave only a bruise through lamellar. The cuirass extended to the thighs with additional strips of armor called pertuges, leather or metal flaps protecting the hips and groin. His arms were covered in splinted vambraces and steel gauntlets. His legs wore greaves, curved plates that protected the shins, and sometimes cuisses for the thighs. His feet were armored in steel sabatons. When fully equipped, a cataphract rider carried between 40 and 60 pounds of armor. That is heavy, but not impossibly so. A medieval knight carried about the same. The difference was the horse. Because the horse was also armored. This is what separated the cataphract from every other heavy cavalry in history, except the later knights. The cataphract horse wore a full set of barding horse armor. The head was protected by a champron, a steel plate shaped to the horse's face with holes for the eyes and ears. The neck was covered by a prinnet, overlapping plates that allowed the neck to bend. The chest was protected by a patrol, a curved steel plate that also served as a shock weapon. The flanks and rump were covered by flanchards and croupiers, more plates or sometimes heavy felt or leather. The horse's legs were unarmored because armored legs would slow the horse too much. But the rest of the horse was a walking tank. The total weight of the horse's armor was another 40 to 60 pounds. Add the rider's armor, the rider's weapons, and the rider himself, and the cataphract horse carried nearly 300 pounds. That required a very special kind of horse. The Byzantines bred a specific war horse, a heavy, muscular animal about 15 hands high with strong legs and a deep chest. They were called Byzantine chargers, or Thracian horses. They were not as fast as an Arabian, but they were as strong as an ox. They could carry the cataphract's weight for hours. They could charge at a gallop for a quarter mile, and they were trained to kick, bite, and trample enemy soldiers without hesitation. The bond between cataphract and horse was sacred. A cataphract who lost his horse in battle was considered disgraced, not because he had failed, but because he had lost a comrade. Now let us talk about weapons. The cataphract was a walking arsenal. His primary weapon was the contos, a heavy lance 12 to 14 feet long, used with two hands. Unlike a medieval knight's lance, which was couched under the arm and used for a single impact, the contos was gripped with both hands and could be thrust repeatedly. The cataphract would charge into the enemy formation, thrust the contos into the face of the first man, pull it back, thrust into the second, pull it back, and keep thrusting until the lance broke or the enemy broke. The contos had a steel tip and often a metal counterweight at the butt. It weighed about 10 pounds. When the contos shattered, and it always shattered, the cataphract drew his secondary weapons. First, a spathion, a straight, double-edged sword about 3 feet long used for thrusting and slashing. Second, a paramerion, a curved, single-edged saber hung on the right side, used for slashing from horseback. Third, a mace, a steel ball on a wooden handle, sometimes flanged, sometimes spiked. The mace was the cataphract's answer to armored enemies. A sword might not cut through a steel helmet, but a mace would crush the helmet and the skull beneath it. Fourth, a bow. Yes, the cataphract carried a bow. This is the most surprising fact. The Byzantine cataphract was not just a shock cavalryman, he was also a mounted archer. Before the charge, the cataphracts would gallop toward the enemy, loose a volley of arrows, wheel away, reform, and charge with the contos. They could shoot from horseback with surprising accuracy, though not as fast as the light horse archers of the steppes. The bow was a composite recurve, made of wood, horn, and sinew, glued together under tension. It could shoot an arrow through mail at 50 yards. The cataphract carried a quiver of 40 arrows, plus a spare bowstring in his boot. This combination, heavy armor, lance, sword, mace, and bow, made the cataphract the most versatile cavalry in history. He could fight at range, at close quarters, on foot, and on horseback. He was not a specialist, he was a complete warrior. But the armor and weapons were only half the story. The other half was training and tactics. The Byzantine military manuals, the Strategikon from the 6th century, the Tactica from the 9th century, are among the most detailed military texts ever written. They describe exactly how a cataphract should train. A recruit spent 2 years learning to ride before he ever touched a weapon. He learned to mount and dismount in full armor. He learned to control his horse with his knees, while both hands held the contos. He learned to shoot his bow from the saddle at a gallop. He learned to fight with the mace against a wooden post, striking at the height of a man's head. He learned to fight in formation, maintaining the exact distance between his horse and the horse on his left, close enough to support each other, far enough to avoid tangling lances. After 2 years, the recruit was allowed to join a cuirassers, a raiding unit for real combat experience. After 5 years, if he had proven himself, he could join the elite klibanophoroi, the armored riders, the cataphracts proper. Not everyone made it. Many washed out. Some died in training. The ones who survived were the best cavalrymen in the world. Now let us witness the cataphracts in their greatest battles, the Battle of Dara in 530 AD, during the reign of Emperor Justinian. The Byzantine general Belisarius faces a massive Persian army, 40,000 men, including the Persian Savaran, the elite cataphracts of the Sasanian Empire. The Persians are confident. They have the best heavy cavalry in the east. But Belisarius has a trick. He hides a force of Byzantine cataphracts in a shallow ravine. Out of sight, the Persians attack. They push back the Byzantine infantry. They think they have won. Then the ravine opens. 500 Byzantine cataphracts, led by a commander named Buzes, charge into the Persian flank. The Persians have never seen Byzantine cataphracts up close. The iron masks, the armored horses, the lances that do not break. The Persian line shatters. They flee. Belisarius wins a stunning victory against a much larger force, the Battle of Trichomarum in 533 AD, the Vandal Kingdom in North Africa. The Vandals have a powerful cavalry, but they are not cataphracts. Belisarius again uses his cataphracts as the decisive arm. He waits for the Vandals to charge, lets them exhaust themselves against his infantry, and then orders his cataphracts to countercharge. The Vandal king, Gelimer, sees the cataphracts coming. He sees the iron masks. He turns his horse and flees. His army follows. The Vandal kingdom is destroyed. North Africa returns to Roman rule. The Battle of the Raphia in 1087 AD, a much later era, but the cataphracts are still fighting, The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos faces the Normans under Robert Guiscard. The Normans are the best heavy cavalry in Western Europe. Their knights are terrifying. But Alexios has cataphracts. He orders them to charge, then pretend to flee. The Normans chase, break formation, and are ambushed by Byzantine light cavalry. Then the cataphracts turn, reform, and charge into the disordered Norman knights. The Normans are slaughtered. Robert Guiscard barely escapes with his life. These battles show the cataphracts' versatility. They could fight head-on. They could fight from ambush. They could use feigned retreats, flank attacks, and shock charges. They were not one-trick ponies. They were an entire toolkit forged into a single unit. The decline of the cataphracts began in the 11th century for several reasons. First, the Byzantine Empire lost its best horse-breeding lands in Anatolia to the Seljuk Turks. Without those horses, the cataphracts could not maintain their numbers. Second, the cost. A fully equipped cataphract with his armored horse cost as much as a small farm. The Byzantine treasury, weakened by centuries of war, could no longer afford to field large cataphract armies. Third, the rise of new enemies. The Crusaders brought new tactics. The Turks brought new speed. The Mongols brought terror. The cataphract, designed for a world of slow-moving infantry and Persian knights, struggled to adapt. By the 13th century, the cataphracts were a shadow of their former selves. They still fought, they still won sometimes, but they were no longer the decisive arm of the empire. The final blow came in 1453 when Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks. The last cataphracts, a handful of old men in rusty armor, rode out of the city gates in a desperate suicidal charge against the Ottoman lines. They were cut down. The Byzantine Empire died with them, or so the story goes. The truth is that the cataphract tradition survived in other armies. The Ottomans adopted heavy armored cavalry called sipahis. The Russians adopted dragoons who wore armor. The Poles perfected the winged hussars, who were in many ways the spiritual descendants of the cataphracts. The Iron Men never truly vanished, they just changed their names. So what can we learn from the Byzantine cataphracts? First, that specialization is overrated. The cataphract was a generalist. He could shoot a bow, charge with a lance, fight with a sword, and crush with a mace. He was not the best archer, not the best lancer, not the best swordsman, but he was good enough at all of them to adapt to any situation. In a world of hyper-specialization, there is a lesson in the cataphract's versatility. Second, that logistics win wars. The Byzantines could field cataphracts because they had the infrastructure, the horse farms, the armories, the training schools, the roads. Without that infrastructure, the cataphracts were just expensive targets. Third, that terror is a legitimate weapon. The cataphracts did not just kill the enemy, they frightened the enemy. The iron masks, the silent advance, the sheer otherworldly appearance, these were designed to break morale before the lances made contact. And they worked. Fourth, that a 1,000-year tradition is not an accident. The Byzantine Empire lasted 1,000 years because it learned, adapted, and innovated. The cataphracts were a product of that adaptability. When the Romans needed heavy cavalry, they did not invent it from scratch. They borrowed from the Persians, the Sarmatians, the Avars. They tested, they refined, they perfected, and then they handed that perfection down through generations. That is the secret of Byzantine resilience, not stubbornness, adaptability. Today you can see the ghost of the cataphract in museums across the world. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York has a magnificent collection of Byzantine lamellar armor. The Istanbul Archaeological Museum has cataphract helmets and maces. The Vatican Library holds copies of the Strategicon, the manual that trained 1,000 years of cataphracts. But the real cataphract is not in a museum. It is in the memory of a lost empire. When you look at a medieval knight in full-plate armor, you are looking at a descendant of the cataphract. When you see a modern tank moving in formation, armored to withstand enemy fire, you are looking at the same idea: mobile, protected shock force translated into steel and diesel. The cataphract did not die. It evolved. The iron men on iron horses are still with us. They just have treads instead of hooves, cannons instead of lances, and night vision instead of iron masks. But the spirit is the same, the spirit of the man who said, "I will cover myself in metal. I will cover my horse in metal. I will become unstoppable." That spirit is eternal. So the next time you see a photograph of a tank column advancing across a desert, remember the cataphracts. Remember the sun flashing off 1,000 polished helmets. Remember the silence before the thunder. Remember the iron masks with their empty, staring eyes. And remember that for 1,000 years, no enemy looked at that sight and thought, "We can win." They thought, "We can survive." And sometimes, survival is the only victory that matters. The Byzantine cataphracts, armored to the extreme, steel from head to toe, were not invincible. But they were close enough that it took an empire 1,000 years to prove otherwise. That is their legend. That is their truth. And that is why, even today, when we see a man in armor on a horse, we stop and stare. Because somewhere deep in our collective memory, we remember the Iron Men, and we are still afraid. Steel from head to toe, the cataphract rides forever.